told Debbie we had to get here early, and this is early for us, but because again, this is another one of those red letter days in history. So we may not get to 1 Corinthians 13 because of all of the things that happened on January 28th. I know I'm addicted to this stuff. What can I say? So yeah, welcome back. Today is January 28th. We have a big week ahead of us. Debbie and I do. Like between now and next week, we will have finished. I shouldn't say finished. Isn't really the right word. Completed. It's a better, like it's turned in. Turned in our dissertation proposals, and I will have finished my second long-term subbing arrangement. That ends on Tuesday. Tuesday's my last day there, and then I go back to the daily grind of just different class every day. And on Friday, number two son has I don't know what the exact word is. Promised, threatened, stated, announced that that is his move-out day. So next week, when you see us, we will be officially empty nesters. It hasn't happened yet, so just saying, kind of thing. It's just saying. So, but on this date, that's what's going to happen next week. What happened on this date in the past was on this date in 814, Charlemagne died. Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, the first of the Holy Roman emperors. The Holy Roman Empire, famously noted for not being Holy Roman or an empire, is that area of Central Europe of which Germany is like the most central part. So like what we call Prussia and Poland and Austria, these are all at one point part of this central area of Germany called the Holy Roman Empire. And the first and greatest ruler was Charlemagne, who was very influential in history, and always wanted to be like the heir of Charlemagne. He's sort of like the Caesar when they talk about rulers of Rome. Caesar was like, or Washington, in the U.S. You always want to be compared to Washington. So as far as Holy Roman Empire's Charlemagne. He was the first, when they talk about it, his was the first Reich. Okay, and then later, I forget who started the second one, and of course Hitler was the third Reich. If you ever wonder what the first one was, it was Charlemagne. 1077, I talked about this last week. It was the start. Today was the conclusion of the drama at Canossa. Canossa, that was where King Henry IV officially absolved, is absolved, I should say. King Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, is officially absolved of his sin and rebellion by Pope Gregory VII. And I just wanted to point that out today because last week I gave the wrong Pope number. It's Gregory VII, and some of us get particular about that kind of stuff. So that was on this date. 500 years later, 1521, the Diet of Worms, or the Diet of Worms, opened, led by Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. This was where they brought in Martin Luther and said, are you going to recant? And allegedly, or it's believed that that's where Luther says his famous, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me," sort of thing. And so that opened on this date in 1521. In 1547, Edward VI became King of England. This was after the death of Henry VIII. Edward VI was a distant relative of the Holy Roman Emperor, but I'm just kind of on a Holy Roman Empire thing today. Edward VI becomes king when he's 9 years old, and he continues his father's Protestant ways for 6 years until he dies at the age of 15, ultimately replaced by Mary. And I think I talked about her 2 weeks ago, where you have Bloody Mary in England and the Marian exiles who go over to Geneva and meet up with Calvin, et cetera, et cetera.
Wait, I'm sorry, Stan. Wasn't it Elizabeth I that came after her brother, her half-brother? And then Mary was...
No, it was Edward, Mary. That's a different Mary. There's two Marys. There's
Oh,
Bloody Mary and there's Mary Queen of Scots. Two different people.
okay.
So no, it's Henry VIII, Edward. Jane Grey is in there for like 9 days. Then it's Elizabeth I.
Oh, okay. All right.
Then Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots is the Queen in Scotland, and then there's all that and all that. So
All right, thanks for clarifying.
see, there you go. See, that's all free. That's not even part of 1 Corinthians. In 1561, the Edict of Orleans was passed in France. France is not a part of the Holy Roman Empire, but the Edict of Orleans suspended persecution of French Huguenots. And French Huguenots, the Huguenots are French Protestants. And this is something that comes and goes in the history of France, where sometimes the king would eliminate it, and there'd be there's a couple of times, a couple of stories where just a huge massacre of Huguenots in France happened. But they're not the Holy Roman Empire, so we won't talk much more about them today. A red letter day for me, it was on this date in 1813 that Pride and Prejudice was published. Has anybody read Pride and Prejudice? I love that book. I read that thing like I don't know, I listened to it at night. Have a MP3 player that I listen to like when I can't sleep or whatever. And so me and Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth and all of that. I'm all over that story. I like all of Jane Austen's. I'm a Janeite. I admit it. But that was published on this date in 1813. In 1896, Joseph Barnby died. Joseph Barnby. I know. I was shocked too. I didn't realize. He was an English composer and conductor. He wrote music for a lot of hymns, including the music to, and I should make you raise your hand if you recognize this song. Stand up for Jesus, you soldiers of the cross, lift high his royal banner. Oh, come all you faithful. The music to All Come All You Faithful. When Morning Gilds the Skies, My Heart Awakening Cries. He wrote the music to that. And of course, a song that used to be a regular in services that I went to. You'd hear it just about every Sunday. And what song was that, dear? Church, Just As I Am. He wrote the music to Just As I Am, kind of thing. So he died on this date in 1896. Oswald J. Smith was converted on this date in 1906 at an R.A. Torrey meeting. He was a famous evangelist, missions leader, pastor, was head of what was called the People's Church in London, Canada, well known for faith promise giving. He was one of the early proponents of faith promise giving. That was a kind of sort of like the precursor to the modern. We call it a capital campaign now. Faith promise giving. He was also a hymn writer, poet. He wrote the song "There Is Joy in Serving Jesus." There is joy in serving Jesus as I travel on my way. Da 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 da. I'm going to edit out the singing part just so you word. But when he died in 1986, Billy Graham wrote, I've lost a dear friend, the man who had more impact on my life than any other, a great preacher, a great songwriter, a man who stands equal with Moody and Torrey. As a missionary statement, he stands alone. There was no equal. So he was converted on this date in 1906. And finally, where were you on this date in 1986? Does anybody know? This was the day that the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. Now, how many of you know where you were on this date in 1986? Yeah. That was the Challenger. That was the one that had Krista McCullough on it, and it blew up 73 seconds into takeoff. The other one, Columbia? What was the other one that exploded? Columbia? That exploded on re-entry. That was on this date. So, a lot of stuff. See, we will get into 1 Corinthians 13. She doubted me. No, she didn't. I'm just putting words in her mouth. All right, well, let's talk about 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 13 today, a passage that we might all have heard of once or twice. As I was talking about it, Debbie reminded me, so we were talking about it earlier this week, Debbie reminded me that it's actually we have like a needle point of it on our wall. 1 Corinthians 13. And I'm like,
Sister made it.
I knew that. I knew that. Yeah, where is that again? Which part of the room is that? So 1 Corinthians 13, again, we're talking about Paul's letter to the church of Corinth. Okay, a church that Paul had spent a great deal of time at, a church that Paul has been corresponding with, a church that Paul is getting messages from. People are coming and telling him stuff. And in this letter, it's a combination of he's responding to things that they wrote in the letter, as well as things he's heard about. And in this passage, in this section, chapter 10 through 14, I think it is, or 11 through 14, Paul is dealing with problems in their worship service. Okay, and first he talked about, so Paul has been talking about problems in worship. That's where I have previously on kind of thing. We talked about a controversy over head coverings in chapter 11, verses 1 through 16. Then there was a problem with the Lord's Supper. Okay, and the problem with head coverings, again, none of these were 100% certain as far as what's going on. Okay, we're not you can kind of make a good guess. You can make you can speculate and come pretty close. And the problem with head covering to me had to do with the earlier idea that people were just kind of deciding that because I'm not married to a believer, that I am no longer married. I no longer need to remain married, and so they were removing whatever reminder to society. I mean, it would be kind of like, if Debbie and I, if Debbie was not a believer and I become a believer, then I say, well, I don't have to wear a wedding ring anymore because my wife isn't a believer and I can only be married to a believer. And so kind of not exactly the same, but there was a problem with the Lord's Supper. And the problem with the Lord's Supper, and we talked about this at length, the problem with the Lord's Supper had to do with the fact that it wasn't equally handled. Remember, there were people that were going and getting stuffed and getting drunk, and there were other people that were going hungry. And Paul is saying when you come together, everybody should have their fill. Everybody should have, you should share with each other, be nice, share kind of thing. And then we started our discussion about the spiritual gifts last week, where Paul gives his, regarding spiritual gifts, that's what SG is, Paul's first main principle is that gifts, or as he refers to them, manifestations of the Spirit, are always, and I've got always underlined, it's in italics on your paper, for the common good. Okay, always for the common good. Okay, and then later he says that these manifestations of the Spirit, like the parts of the body, are varied, but they serve one purpose. They serve a single purpose. And you'll see I had that neat little arrow thing. I kind of was playing around with it. That's where you go, ooh, kind of thing. He knows how to put an image in. And that is, it's for the common good. It doesn't take much to amuse me, as you can tell. So these spiritual gifts are for the common good. And then I talked about the idea that each believer has at least one individual spiritual gift is what I'm calling, and I just made this up. This is my own thing, a systematic theological construct. That or you call it a doctrine.
Standism.
Yeah, standism, a systematic theological construct. It's like you take several different verses from several different passages and put them all together and say, this is what the Bible teaches. That's, again, doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just saying if you can't just look at any one given passage and go, oh, well, that clearly, you have to put this verse with this verse and with this verse, kind of thing. So just so we're clear as far as, and there's a lot of these. Okay, Bible doctrines are constructs, and we put them together, and you either agree with the subpoints or don't, and sometimes you put all the subpoints together and you still don't agree with them, kind of stuff. So generally, when I was in college, I was on a debate team, and there was a guy, the smartest guy I ever knew. I mean, this guy was just, he couldn't remember names, dates, and places. So, I would, we would take history of civilization together, and I would just kill him on the test. because as you might guess, I don't forget unimportant things like who Charlemagne was and things like that. But this guy could figure stuff out. He was just amazing in how he could figure stuff out. Again, like I said, he went on to get a PhD in communication, and I lost touch with him several years ago. But he was on the debate team with me, and we would be in these discussions. And every once in a while, he would just point out that that the word clearly, when anybody says something is clear, when somebody telegraphs that something is clear, it's almost always not. It's kind of like, clearly this is what. Like then, okay, wait. So to me, it's like a red flag. I try not to use that word, because of that, because then I'm like, because I've said that enough to Debbie, and Debbie will know he's bluffing, So like I tried it the other day. Clearly, Debbie, you need to obey me. She's like, you're bluffing, kind of thing. So, but again, when somebody says the Bible is very clear on this, like, well, okay, maybe not. I don't know, but. So, at the end of chapter 12, at the end of last week, we talked about all of these different gifts and these different positions and apostles, prophets, teachers, and different words he gives. But he says at the end of chapter 12, he says, now eagerly desire the greater gifts. Now, one of the tricky things about that, and this is one of the problems with chapter and verse separation kind of thing. So my Bible, I've got the updated NIV, which is the 2011, I think. And so my Bible splits 31 into two parts. So you can kind of see here, like right, you see the little line there. So the first half of verse 31 is at the top, and the second half is at the bottom. Because there is an argument where you say, okay, when he says, now eagerly desire the greater gifts, is that referring back to the list of gifts that he just talked about? And say, okay, one of those is better than the other. Does anybody remember the one of these things is not like the other? What show is that? Sesame Street. One of these things just does not belong. Okay? So, or does that introduce the next thing? See, I think it introduces the next thing. Because he says, now eagerly desire the greater gifts, and yet I will show you. Because you think, which one? I will show you the most excellent way. Okay, so he's still talking about gifts. He's still talking about manifestations of the Spirit. How does the Spirit work in the body? How should the Spirit work in the body? And we'll see in chapter 14 that there's this disruption happening because of people speaking in tongues. And again, we'll get into all of that fun stuff in chapter 14. But he says, he's still talking about that. So chapter 13 is in the context of this manifestation of the Spirit in the body. Okay? Now the problem is, most of the time when we see chapter 13, we don't think about that. We see chapter 13, and when do you hear chapter 13? We hear chapter 13 at weddings. Okay? Which is fine. That's, it serves that purpose, but Paul doesn't write this simply to say, it's about time I say something really great about love. Okay? He's like, no, this is the most excellent way in terms of the manifestation of the Spirit. So what he's going to introduce here, he's going to introduce his second main principle as far as manifestations of the Spirit or the use of spiritual gifts or how these things should all work together. The first one is that they have to work for the common good. If it's something that's just benefiting me and not benefiting the common good, then is it really a manifestation of the Spirit? And see, and this to me, and this is an opinion, and it's a small o opinion, this is part of the problem of the modern approach to, okay, everybody has a spiritual gift and it's your job to discover what it is and it's your job to develop it, kind of thing, because that makes it all about me. Okay? Oh, I need to, I have the gift of fill in the blank. I have the gift of nonsense. That's what Debbie tells me. No, she doesn't. I have the gift. Actually, what Debbie tells me is that I have the spiritual gift of not being believed. Okay, it's a gift. It's a gift because she reminds me of that quite often on like a daily basis, like a multi-times a day basis. She reminds me of that. But it's my gift, right there.
Nobody believes you. Yeah.
See, that's how I know the day has started.
Special words.
Yeah, those 3 words that she says to me all the time. Okay. So, and down at the bottom, in the bottom thing, I point out a quotation again from Gordon Fee, who wrote one of the commentaries that I'm using. And he says, the love affair with this love chapter has also allowed it to be read regularly apart from its context. That we read this chapter and how many have ever really thought about what does 1 Corinthians 13 have to do with chapter 12 or chapter 14? I mean, how often does that come up? Usually, every time I've heard it talked about in a wedding, I've never heard him say, okay, now husband and wife here, when you guys are going to go exercising your spiritual gifts, here's what Paul said. No, it's just, okay, this is how you love each other. And it's true. It's all good. But again, my point here is to kind of try and keep it in, how does this fit into Paul's argument altogether? Okay? I could rail up here all I want, and 1 Corinthians 13 is still going to be used in wedding services, and that's fine.
So, Stan, so Paul didn't write this intending like, oh, I'm going to have some really cool wedding verses now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody's going to...
Paul is looking at the church at Corinth, and from what he's heard and what he's seen and what he's reading, he's saying, what is missing from your worship services? This is what's missing from your worship services. And this is how I know it's missing, because of these characteristics of love. So Paul argues in 12:31 that believers should desire the greater gift. Okay, and then at the end of this, in chapter 14, verse 1, he says, follow the way of love and eagerly desire the gifts of the Spirit. So it starts with love. So again, the second main fundamental principle of the manifestations of the Spirit. One is it's for the common good, and secondly is it's done in love. Okay. So chapter 13, the love chapter, should be read in its context. Okay. Now, I'll give $1 to anyone who at the next wedding ceremony stands up when the preacher says, excuse me, are you using that in its I'll give $1. You prove to me that you did it, boom. It's worth $1. Just saying. Cash. I'm putting cash on this here. That's how strongly I feel about it. But sometimes people look at chapter 13, and because it does sort of stick out, right? If you're reading through chapter 12, 10, 11, 12, 13, then, and it might be that it sticks out because we're so familiar with it.
It's poetical.
Yeah. And so people look at this, and some have argued that this is actually comes from an external source. That it's a poem that Paul picked up. And we know Paul does that, right? So it says, let me see here. Chapter 13 is often thought of as an external source. Now, if you compare it Acts 17:29, when Paul is at the Areopagus or Mars Hill, what does he do? When it serves his purpose, he quotes, your poets have said. So we know Paul would do that. Okay? So there is that possibility that this is an external source. The problem is, there's no external source. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we've got a manuscript from a poet, a Corinthian poet from a certain year that wrote this. It's just people look at it and go, oh, that because that's different, seems different than the rest. It's not. I mean, it could have been a hymn that Paul wrote and he used, or something that he used and he kind of fit it in there later on. I mean, it fits his purpose, or it could be that Paul said, this is important, I really need to work on this. Okay. It's just a thought. It doesn't mean, even if it is an external source, it doesn't really reflect on Paul's use of it or what the point he's trying to get across. So chapter 13 itself has 3 components. three parts. One of them, the first part, is the necessity of love. So it kind of breaks down into three interesting divisions. The necessity of love. Number two, the character of love. And number three, the permanence of love. So on the first point, verse 1 through 3, let's read. It says, and I will yet show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men or angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Okay? He starts off, and again, because in 14 we're going to find out that the problem is tongues. Okay, the main visible problem in Corinth, in the Corinth worship service, is tongues. The speaking in foreign languages or other languages, heavenly languages, whatever you want to call it. Okay, glossolalia. Okay, that's the problem. So Paul leads off with that. Okay, and he says, if I speak with the tongues of men and angels, I am just this banging sound. Kind of, when I'm reminded our number 2 son, the one who says he's going to move out. One of his favorite things to do as a child, I don't know, who's an empty nester here? Empty nester, okay. So as they start when you get closer to the moving out point, do you suddenly remember all the things they did when they were 2? So we've got a picture, but number 2 son used to sit in the middle of the kitchen. We have a small kitchen, and he could reach into all of the drawers where the pots and pans were, and he would just sit in the middle there and just reach in and pull out all the pots and pans. And he would be surrounded by pots and pans in the middle of the floor, and then he could bang on them and make noise, and he just loved that. Now he's a drummer, so he should have known at that point. Looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, should have known that. And whenever I see that, whenever I read this verse, I think about that, the noise that he would make. This is bang, 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 bang. It's like, yeah, clearly it's visible. You can hear it. You can't not hear it. And we would do that, like all parents, is because it's like, well, at least we know where he is, right? And but he says, if you have, you're just but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Okay. So again, I'm not going to get into the listing of the different gifts and what they all mean. Paul's point is, all of these different elements, if they're not done with love, they're nothing. Okay? That you can have somebody who's and again, when we get into 14, we'll see that apparently Paul is asserting or suggesting that, hey, there are people that are speaking in tongues, not because they're really manifesting the Spirit, but they just want to be seen as somebody who speaks in tongues. Oh yeah, well, so-and-so can do it, so can I. I'm going to just stand up there, you don't have to say anything. It doesn't have to make any sense. That's what tongues are, right? I mean, just say something, and just say the Spirit moved me, and then boom, I'm a great guy. Paul's like, if you're not doing it with love, if it's not building up the common good, forget about it. It's nothing. Okay? So, where am I? I lost my place here. So, on the first point, 13, without love, anything one does is nothing. Now, we talk about, what is love? What is it? When we talk about what is love, and again, that's a whole nother, whole nother topic. I've always kind of, in my own mind, and this is just speculation on my own part, I've kind of put this there's sort of like a spectrum. Okay, so there's like being polite, friendly, kind, love. Polite, friendly, kind, love. Underneath polite, that's like indifferent, which is, I was trying to, one of my classes has vocabulary words we have to go over, and one of the vocabulary words is indifferent. And I was trying to explain to them what a great word indifferent is. Might as well talk to, might as well, Let me tell you about I'd get about as much as a response if I did. But, like indifferent is just, when you say I'm indifferent. People say that like hate is the opposite of love. It's not. Indifference is the opposite of love. Because hate is an emotion. Hate takes effort. You have to try. You don't just casually hate someone. You got to work at it. Okay? And it's really a waste of time, unless, of course, you're talking about the New York Mets. Then it's okay. Then it's justified. But otherwise, it's like, but indifference. It's just, that's, and being polite, just that's like minimum. Just kind of the minimum. Where's the bathroom? Oh, it's over there. How are you? I'm fine. And we're very polite. We're a very polite society. Friendly, to me, friendly is where you do for people what they want. That's friendly. That's being nice. Friendly, to me, friendly and nice are kind of, that's where you do what people want. How does it, when a ninth grader tells me, oh, you're nice, what that tells me is like, okay, whatever I did, it was what they wanted. Okay? Because that's what being nice is to me. That's what being friendly is to me. Being kind is what you do for people what they need. Okay, it's how it determines your relationship with other people. Okay, and that doesn't necessarily, to me, again, this is just my opinion, and sometimes somebody needs to be told that they're a nitwit. That doesn't necessarily mean you go, hey, Marty, listen, I got to tell you, I wouldn't do that to Marty.
You might.
Pardon me?
You might.
You might. I'll go to Linda. Say, Linda, will you talk to Marty and tell him about it? No, I'm just kidding. Kind of. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's my job to go out there and say, hey, you're a nitwit, kind of thing. But it's doing something for what they need, and sometimes it's not always taken well. And maybe some of you have stories where you had a relative or a friend or somebody that you had to, like an intervention or something along that line. It's what they needed. It's probably the kindest thing you could have done for that person. Doesn't always go over well. Doesn't always say, oh yeah, thanks. I would have never known. Thanks for telling me that. Doesn't always go over well. And I think love is just simply kind of a condensed it's kind of a focused element of kindness, where you're doing for people what they need, what the common good needs. So to me, that's kind of how I look at it. And you can differ with me. That's not a systematic theological construct. That's just Stan's opinion, sort of thing. But when we're talking about love, to me, it's that focusing on the highest good for the other person. What does he or she need? Okay, and your focus is on the other person. It's not necessarily, or it's not at all on what you get out of it. Okay, like if I do this, she needs to do this, and I'm going to do this for her, because if she does it for her, then I'm going to get this. Okay, that's what they call it, like a transactional relationship, where I do for you, assuming you're going to do for me. Okay, so just throw that. That's free. That's not on your. It's not on one of your. That won't be on your test, although it should be. It needs to be on your test. To which Debbie says, nobody believes you, right? So. On the first point, 13:1 through 3, without love, anything anyone does is nothing. Okay, nothing. And I think what Paul is talking about, nothing here, is just, it means it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't have spiritual consequence. It doesn't have eternal significance. I mean, they may like it. My kids, the ninth graders that I have would love it if I would come in and give them a Snickers bar every day. Okay? I'd be their favorite teacher. I'd be broke. I mean, those things are expensive. I just say that because I discovered that the way I have to get these kids to do something is to give them candy. Ninth grade, got to give them candy to do something. The teacher's coming back on Wednesday. One of their first assignments that she posted on her calendar is they're going to get a coloring page for Friday. Ninth grade, coloring page. Okay.
On the subject?
On their book, they're supposed to write a coloring page and fill in the colors for the first chapter of their book. Kind of stuff. It's like, okay, ninth grade. All right, I'm good. See, I was way beyond coloring when I was in ninth grade, but that's just me. And she's going to be super popular. She's probably going to come in with Snickers bar and crayons. And Oh, yeah, you remember that Mr. Ray? He was terrible. He never gave us crayons. I'll just delete out this part where I'm whining about that. Yeah, the education system. So, without love, anything anyone does is nothing. This includes any and all gifts or manifestations of the Spirit. Now, the interesting question, and I don't have an answer to this. I don't have an answer to this question.
So why are you bringing it up?
Well, just so it doesn't sound like I'm ignoring it to me. It's like, so what this suggests is that these gifts can be practiced without love. Okay? Which kind of, to me, suggests that when we look at this, the spiritual enabling of a spiritual gift, say, okay, God has somehow blessed my abilities to do something, that they can be done without love, then that, to me, it's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, to me, a spiritual gift, if you start looking at this, a spiritual gift is a natural ability that you have that's used for the common good in love. Okay? And so it could be, so if you have the spiritual gift of teaching or the spiritual gift of prophesying or whatever, again, almost anything can be a spiritual gift, you can do that without love. Okay, so again, that to me kind of argues against the whole idea of, okay, God has kind of blessed you, and anytime you use this gift, it's going to be, there's some particular spiritual thing. See, again, I don't like that. Has anybody seen the movie? I'm wandering here. Debbie will tell, I'll go home and I'll say, how did it go? She'll say, well, you wandered. Okay, I know. Has anybody seen the movie The Apostle with Robert Duvall? Has anybody seen it? It's I think it's like Farrah Fawcett's last movie before she died. You know who Robert Duvall, the actor, Robert Duvall?
Robert Downey Jr.?
No, I don't think he's in it. But Robert Duvall plays this guy who's a preacher. He's a Pentecostal preacher. And the thing about that film, if you watch that film and you see Robert Duvall, the actor, Academy Award winning, I believe he's an Academy Award winning actor. I think he got like a Best Supporting Actor for The Godfather. He was the consigliere in the Godfather movies. When you see Robert Duvall preaching, the actor Robert Duvall preaching, you are like, I'd go hear this guy. I'd go hear this guy in a minute. Because he's got it. I mean, he's standing up there and he's got, you would not guess for a million years, if you didn't know who Robert Duvall was, and you walked into a service and you saw him standing up there doing what he's doing in this movie, you would not guess for a million years that he's not a preacher. He's got the motions, he's got the articulation, you're like, wow, this guy. Some would look at him and go, he's got a gift. Yeah, he's an actor, kind of thing. But it's not, it's not being done for the common good. It's not being done in love. But man, is he, y'all gonna go watch it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, the last movie you recommended was Strange Brew. Is it
Well,
anything like that?
it's yeah.
That was a weird movie.
That was a weird movie.
It was.
I will
How are
add
you?
my recommendation to his recommendation for the apostle.
Okay.
She did not. Yeah, Debbie did not recommend Strange Brew. No, she did not. She did not.
And nobody believes you.
That was strange.
It was.
Dan.
Says, yeah. That's a great film. I'm sorry. I'm going to edit out this part here. Strange Brew. Hey, I suggested it in love.
Okay, so you're doing your part.
There, yeah. So, okay. So this includes any and all gifts or manifestation of the spirits. Gordon Fee again says, possession of charismata, that is the gifts, is not the sign of the Spirit. The fact that a person can speak in tongues is not necessarily a sign of the Spirit. Loving others as Christ loved us is. So how does the Spirit manifest itself? And we look at, we kind of look at this big, we want to see somebody prophesying. We want to see somebody doing this. And I was like, no, it's loving each other as Christ loved us is. Paul's description of love, let me read verses 4 through 7. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Okay. Now, these are great descriptions of love. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying it's wrong to use these as a way, like in a wedding, to say these are a great description. But if you think about it in the context, Paul is looking back at the church. Okay, and he said, love, a couple of things that I find interesting. It keeps no record of wrongs. Does anybody remember about what's going on in the church of Corinth? And he talks about it in 1 Corinthians 6.
Taking each other to court.
Taking each other to court. Okay? I mean, what is going to court against somebody but keeping a record of wrong? Okay? And Paul's like, yeah, it keeps no record of wrong. Okay? Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. You know, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. It's interesting. I like this guy and I was talking to Debbie about this the other day. I like this guy, and I follow this guy on Instagram. He's actually a Mormon. I think I might have talked about him before. But he's a scholar of the Bible and religion. And people, he will show clips from people, and then he will respond to these clips. And what strikes me about some of these clips, because this guy he's very much an academic, kind of what we would call a liberal sort of thing. But one of the things that strikes me is that a lot of these clips that he shows, where people that are confronting him on Instagram, are really vicious. You know, they'll show a thing with this guy and they'll say, like, "Who is this idiot? I don't know." And they're posting this on whatever their social media channel is. You know, "Who is this idiot? You know, this," you know, or they'll make fun of the guy or something like that. And "Oh yeah, this guy thinks he's," you know, it's like, seriously, you know, and then the guy, you know, bless his heart, he never responds in kind, or never really says. It's just clear, because he just sits there and says, okay, well, this is what the data says. This is what the Hebrew word means, you know, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, yeah. It's like, rejoices not in evil. It's like, okay, these guys just think somehow that this is endearing. And perhaps their crowd is enjoying it, but I'm sorry, I need to get back on the point.
Their crowd is not loving.
Right. So I'm like, is this guy exercising the gift of the Spirit? These people, no, it's not loving. It's not for the common good. But it does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It's like, you know, I mean, we you know, we kind of get this vicarious thrill, or do we, I should say, we do. Do we get this kind of vicarious thrill when we hear about a pastor who was brought low, fell, something? Like, oh, yeah, well, you know, I knew he was, kind of thing. Beginning verse 8, love never fails. I've thought about, you know, the difference between married life or married love and a mother's love. That generally speaking, and again, I'm sure there's exceptions to this rule, that if somebody commits a heinous crime, whatever it is, doesn't really matter what it is, the odds are really good that person's mother will still love him. Now, the wife may walk away, the kids will walk away, you know, but the person's mother will still love him. Kind of like, you know, love never fails, sort of thing. But Paul's description of love in verses 4 through 17 all deal with behaviors, not feelings. It's another great movie that I've watched over and over again is this, When the Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming. Has anyone seen that one? It's an early Alan Arkin film. And I love this film. It was one of the things, I think it's because of The Russians Are Coming, that Debbie's parents let me marry her. Because they figured anybody that likes this movie can't be all bad. Okay? They were wrong, but it's this Russian submarine comes up on the coast of Gloucester Island, and there's a Russian soldier who meets the girl and falls in love with her, and he's trying to tell her how he feels. And all he can come out with is that in my bad Russian accent, he's like, I have strong feelings of affection for you, kind of thing, you know. But love never, you know, it's not a feeling, it's a behavior. It's a doing. Okay? It's a doing, it's a helping something, helping individuals. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. Okay? Now there's 2 points that Paul is making here to the church at Corinth. One, you're focusing on the wrong things. But secondly, remember what we said about one of the problems with the theology of the church at Corinth. Does anybody remember? This idea of an over-realized eschatology. This idea that they had arrived. This is it. We are, boom. And Paul is pointing out, no, we're not arrived. You know, the eschaton, the second coming, the establishment of the kingdom hasn't happened yet. So that's when everything is going to be perfect. You haven't reached it yet. You may think you have, but you haven't. Okay? But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. So Paul's point in verse 10, vis-a-vis the Corinthians, is that completeness has not arrived. And then for what it's worth, and this is my next line, FYI, there's almost no chance this verse has anything to do with the canon. And by canon, I mean the books of the Bible. There is an argument to be made as far as when you start talking about a closed canon, and this is at the risk of opening up a huge can of worms, but hey, why not?
You talked about the cessationism last week.
Yeah, but it's some people have said, okay, well, once the 27 books of the Bible, that this is talking to the 27 books of the Bible. Why do we not have gifts anymore? Well, because completeness is referring to the Bible. Okay, has been used in that way. No. This is where that guy, McClellan, this guy on Instagram, he would go, there's absolutely no way this verse applies to that point. Okay, he's not talking about inspiration. He's not talking about the Bible. Okay, he's talking about the second coming, the establishment of the kingdom, the realization of the end times, the final kingdom. When that comes, everything will be established. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. And for the record, I was really good at it. Just saying, that's my part. I'm still good at that. Nobody can reason like a child as well as I can. Just talk to Debbie about some of our discussions. It's like, But he says, when I became a man, I put the way of childhood behind me. For now, we see only reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Paul uses a mirror analogy here in verse 12. What you don't realize is that one of the things about the city of Corinth was they made mirrors. They were brass mirrors. They were known for making brass mirrors. It was one of the things they were known for, which kind of makes sense. This is why Paul is using this particular analogy. Okay, it's like, there's other interesting things like that. Like in Laodicea, in Laodicea, they were known for making like an eye salve. And if you read in Revelation about the church of Laodicea, where they talk about the eyes and seeing, because that was something. It would be like if I used if I'm talking to people in Detroit and I used the car analogy, it would resonate more with somebody from Detroit than it would somebody from Chicago. Okay? If I talked about, governors in jail, people in Illinois would go, oh yeah, that's us. Okay? And so he's using this analogy that they would go, oh yeah, that's our life. We do that. Yeah, I understand. They understand the difference between what you see in the mirror, and they would have these polished bronze mirrors, but they realize, okay, that's still a reflection. That's not, they understand the difference between a reflection. Okay? Now I know in part, then I shall know in part. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Verse 13 is probably the best known and probably the most difficult verse in the chapter for a number of reasons, and specifically 5. Okay? One is, okay, is this something temporal or logical? Meaning, is there going to be a time, temporal meaning time? Is there a time period? And you could go either way on these. So I'm not going to answer these. It's like this is, okay, is there a time element to these? That at some point these are all going to go away, and I think there's an argument to be made there. Or is this logical? Okay, and you can go there, because again, he's talking about love being the most excellent way. So to me, there is a logical element to it as well. Maybe it's both. Okay? And now these three remain. Again, is this remain, does it mean now or is it in the future? Are we not going to speak in tongues in the celestial kingdom, in the millennial kingdom? Okay, does it remain in the future? Okay, where did the discussion of faith and hope come from? Okay, now he doesn't talk about faith or hope in chapter 13. I don't think he does. No, he doesn't talk about hope. Okay, now he talks about faith in chapter 11, and he's going to talk about faith again in chapter 14. But suddenly he's like, wait, faith, hope, and love remain. Wait, where did faith and hope come from? Okay. How exactly is love greater than these two? Okay, notice I got the little arrow, faith and hope. Again, ooh, arrow kind of thing. And how does this statement conclude the paragraph? Okay, I think it concludes the paragraph by just reminding everybody, when it comes right down to it, what rises to the surface, no matter how you arrange everything else, what rises to the surface is it done in love? Whatever you do, is it done in love? Is it done for the benefit of the other person? Does it rule out your own personal benefit? Is it something that people need? Is it building up the common good? This is what raises to the surface. Now it could be that this is a common phrase. That people, maybe it was something that was written on the door of the church, faith, hope, and love. We specialize in faith, hope, and love. Okay. But it probably means that, unlike the gifts or the manifestations of the Spirit, love is both now and forever. That love is a spiritual gift. It's a manifestation of the Spirit. It's the ultimate manifestation of the Spirit that can be practiced now and will last forever, because love never fails. And the final thing is that love is the second criterion for the effective work of the Spirit. Okay? It's done for the common good, and it's done in love. Now, this is a great description of love, but Paul, again, he's looking back at the church of Corinth, and he's going, you guys have all of these great things going on, you have all these activities, but it's not for the common good, and it's not in love. How do I know it's not in love? Because look at all of these different, this is what love is, this is what you're doing. I'm guessing there's some element that Paul knows about the church of Corinth for every one of these things. Love never fails. I don't know, maybe he knows about marriages where people that were in love would just say, hey, I can't be married to you anymore. Because again, this is one of the earlier things. That we talked about this, right? Where if the husband wants to stay with you, just because he or she is not a believer doesn't mean they can't love you. He's like, love never fails. If you're in love, love never fails. Never, all of these different things. All right, I'm at the end of time. In 14 verse 1, he's going to get back to the worship service. But again, he said, follow the way of love. Desire the gifts. Think of, but we'll get into how that works out next week. Any questions?
The first name is Mr. Fee.
Gordon Fee. Yeah, it's a great commentary series. But all right, thank you very much. We'll see you next week.